Welcome to Dr. Stephen Sinatra's webinar on cholesterol and heart health. The goal of today's webinar is to dispel the myth about cholesterol and heart health and to show you how to avoid the real and little understood culprits that can prevent you from enjoying optimal heart health, well-being, and longevity. My name is Donna Engelgaw-Kozlow, and I'm moderating today's presentation with Dr. Sinatra. You can ask a question at any time during this webinar. Just type your question into the Ask a Question box that appears on the left-hand side of your screen and then hit Submit. Dr. Sinatra will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Please note that we will send you all of the materials from today's webinar in an email later. If you have a question that isn't answered today, please feel free to connect with Dr. Sinatra on Facebook, Twitter, or on his blog at drsinatra.com. Dr. Sinatra is a well-renowned, board-certified cardiologist, certified bioenergetics psychotherapist, and certified nutrition and anti-aging specialist. His holistic methods focus on reducing inflammation and maximizing the heart's ability to produce and use energy. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Stephen Sinatra. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Donna, for that awesome introduction. And I want to extend a warm welcome to you webinar participants. I'm very excited to be here to get the word out to people who may be meeting me for the very first time and learning about my integrative approach to heart health and longevity. If you're worried about your cholesterol or contemplating a cholesterol-lowering drug, I want to provide you with the facts today to help you better understand the role of cholesterol in the body so you can make informed decisions about your heart health. There's so much information about cholesterol and the role it plays in our bodies. People have been led to believe that cholesterol is a terrible thing. I call it cholesterol mania. Folks, it's a myth that cholesterol is the bad guy when it comes to heart health. What will you learn today? Well, folks, I'm going to talk about my 30 to 40 years of being a cardiologist. And I'm going to tell you some incredible stories. For example, when I was doing angiograms on a day-to-day basis, I'd be amazed that I would do an angiogram on somebody who had a cholesterol of 285 and above. And guess what? I expected to find heart problems, and I didn't. And the converse was true. I would do an angiogram on a cholesterol of 150, and I expect to find a perfectly normal heart, and they had heart problems. So something didn't fit. There's a lot of misconception about cholesterol out there. For example, patients with high total cholesterols can live longer lives. It's been studied in Europe and even in the United States. And then there's this whole aspect about what you eat makes a big impact in your blood. You know, if you eat a lot of saturated fats like eggs, or you eat a lot of monounsaturated fats like avocados, it's okay. It's not going to really budge the amount of cholesterol in the blood because your liver makes most of the blood cholesterol. And look, folks, those monounsaturated fats in olive oil and avocado and those saturated fats in coconut, they're not evil. They're good for you. The real bad guys are sugar and simple carbohydrates. You know, not just the sugar you put in your coffee and your tea, but the pastas, the crackers, the bagels, the cakes, the sweets. They cause inflammation. And then there's the killer fats, the trans fats. You need to learn about that. You need to learn about the pros and cons of statins. And my recommendations for optimal heart health and longevity. Stay tuned. So folks, where did this great cholesterol myth originate from? You know, in our book, The Great Cholesterol Myth, Dr. Johnny Bodian and I exposed this myth. We looked at the history. For example, there was this study called the 7-Country Study, when Ansel Keys cherry-picked the data showing that countries with higher cholesterol had more heart problems. And when you cherry-pick the data, it makes sense. But look, let me give you an example. He left the island of Crete out in the Mediterranean. Now, the average cholesterol for an inhabitant of Crete was over 200, but they didn't have any heart problems there for even a decade. Now think about that. Over 100, no heart problems. Something doesn't make sense. And there were other countries as well. It just didn't fit. What I want to talk about today is don't fear your cholesterol number, folks. Look, it's only a number. And cholesterol does a lot of great things for the body. And I also want to reassure you that what you put in your mouth, saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, healthy fats, omega-3 fats, they're not to be vilified. They're good for you. Eggs are good for you. An organic egg once a day is great for you. Coconuts are saturated fat. That's good for you. But why did saturated fats get vilified? Because they got turned into cholesterol in the body. And if cholesterol is the bad guy, well, then we got to throw out those fats. And then we went on these low-fat diets. And then guess what happened with that? People were gaining weight. Hey, they even developed heart problems later on in life. Something's wrong with the low-fat diet, especially if you combine it with these, carbs, these sugary carbs that create inflammation in the body. There's been an incredible leap over the last 4 or 5 decades, and I want to expose that truth to you in the next few minutes. I want to tell you why my views on cholesterol have changed. When I was a young doctor, I really bought the fact that cholesterol and heart problems, went hand in hand. In fact, I was a choir boy for cholesterol. When I was chief of cardiology at my institution in Connecticut, I used to lecture for the drug companies. Why? Because I believed that cholesterol and heart problems was so entrenched that I wanted to teach other doctors. But guess what? Something happened in 1993 that changed my whole opinion on statin drugs. There was a research article that came out showing that coenzyme Q10, like cholesterol, was severely depleted by statin drugs. Didn't make any sense, folks. How could the most vital nutrient for the heart be knocked out of the box? The heart requires CoQ10 for survival. I started to question. It didn't make any sense. And around that time, I was doing the angiograms anyway, and I wasn't seeing a correlation of heart problems with higher cholesterol. Something had to give. I started reading more and more. And studies came out. They were showing positive impacts of statin drugs on heart health. But a lot of it was sort of statistical gymnastics. They were talking about relative risk and absolute risk. It was hodgepodge. And when Dr. Johnny Bowden and I wrote the book, The Great Cholesterol Myth, dozens of doctors were on our side. They saw the light too. So it wasn't just, our myth-busting situation about cholesterol. Now it's becoming more and more mainstream. So cholesterol is not the villain of heart health. Cholesterol does a lot of great things in the body. What's the real cholesterol story? Cholesterol is beneficial to the body, and here's why. Look, cholesterol is a necessary component of our lives. Let's dissect it. For example, when the sunlight hits your skin, cholesterol in the skin with the sunlight activates vitamin D. We got to have vitamin D. Vitamin D is essential to health. What else does cholesterol do? Well, it lubricates the skin. It creates neurotransmitter function in the brain. There's documented evidence that when cholesterol levels fall, more cognition problems can occur. We need cholesterol for neurotransmission of those impulses. We need cholesterol for sex hormones. We make our adrenal hormones. We make testosterone, progesterone, all these hormones from cholesterol. Our bile salts are important for digestion. We need cholesterol so much that to vilify it is a mistake. Look, folks, there's data out there to show that the higher your cholesterol, the longer you will live. There were studies in Western Europe and with studies in this country. And guess what? The higher your cholesterol, the more protection you have from gastrointestinal and respiratory infections. Cholesterol is something good for you. Why we vilify it and why we kill it defies my imagination. So folks, if cholesterol is not the major culprit in poor heart health, well, what is? Well, there's lots of factors here. Let me tell you about sugar. Sugar is the major inflammation situation in the heart. Why? Because sugar elicits an insulin response. And we know that insulin is the most endothelial, unfriendly hormone around. What do I mean by that? Well, in the lining of blood vessels, you have what we call a basement membrane. And when you are putting sugar into your body, and it's not just the sugar you put in your tea or your coffee, it can be bagels and crackers and pastas and processed carbs, white flours. We call it a high glycemic index because the sugar gets into the bloodstream quickly. Now there's an insulin surge. And when you have surges of insulin and sugar, the insulin, being endothelial cell unfriendly, causes oxidation of the lining of the blood vessel. Now, what's that? Well, with oxidation, what happens is you get a generation of free radicals. And if the body's defense mechanisms are overwhelmed, we get free radical oxidative stress, and that causes aging. Now, more importantly, the higher sugars in your bloodstream, due to insulin surges by eating a lot of sugars, now combine with proteins, and we call that glycation, and that causes accelerated aging. So it's really important to have a good diet, and that's a diet containing a balance of proteins, healthy fats, and really, good carbohydrates like legumes, chickpeas, and broccoli. They have a lower glycemic index. And now I want to come to trans fats. Trans fats are killer fats. They're like unguided missiles. If you read a label and it says that there's trans fats on the label, avoid it at all costs. And by the way, a lot of labels are disguised because it'll say 0 trans fats, but it could say partially hydrogenated oils. If it does say that, there's trans fats. So be careful, folks, about labeling. Don't be fooled. If the label has canola oil, cottonseed oil, safflower oil, corn oil, and it has partially hydrogenated, don't take it in. When my patients were suffering and I wanted to help them more, I would say, don't eat anything out of a box or a can. This way, you're protected, from trans fats. Margarines are another example. Some mayonnaises, synthetic mayonnaises, are another example where you want to avoid them. I like organic butter. And yes, it's a saturated fat, but who cares? Organic butter is fine. I have it with my eggs. Now, I talked about oxidation, I talked about sugars, I talked about trans fats. Let me tell you about the stress connection. When I became a psychotherapist years ago, I wrote my book, Heartbreak and Heart Disease, because I realized back in the mid-90s that emotional stress was far more of a risk factor in clogging, your arteries up, much more than this cholesterol hypothesis. Emotional stress sets the cascade of our hormones being driven up, like cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline. And when these hormones go up, and why do these hormones go up? It's like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I call it vigilance. These can cause biochemical changes in the body. So stress in combination with a sugary diet and trans fats are really the denominators of poor heart health. So what are the key takeaways here? Look, folks, cholesterol is found at the scene of the crime, but it's not the perpetrator. Cholesterol does a lot of good things. Remember, it's protective. It's a life-sustaining molecule. Saturated fats, they're not too bad. It's all about balance. Look, I don't want you to eat 100% of your calories in saturated fats, but you can put them in your diet. Certainly 10% of your calories can be saturated fat. The real culprits, and what I want you to get is this: sugars and trans fats are their killers, and they can create poor heart health. Now, what has science taught us about cholesterol and heart health? Well, folks, I call this the old science. You would go to your doctor and you would get a total cholesterol, an HDL and an LDL and triglycerides and blood sugar, and then you see on TV the bad cholesterol, the good cholesterol. This is outdated. It's oversimplified. There's much better science out there. But look, let's take the best of the old science and let me dissect it for you, because this is what all of us doctors agree on, that the doctors of antiquity and the newer doctors that believe in this newer science. The best of the old science is this. It's the triglyceride to HDL ratio. And if that ratio is less than 2, that's really good for heart health. Let me give you an example. If somebody came into my office and I drew their triglycerides and HDL, and the triglycerides were, let's say, 90, 95, and the HDL was like 50, that ratio is less than 2. 100 over 50 is 2. But I would see the converse more frequently. I would see people with triglycerides of 250, 300, 400, with HDLs down into the 40s, 45s, 35s. They'd have ratios greater than 10. That's inflammation. That's a ticket to poor heart health. Now, the old science still measures blood sugar, which is very important. And we look at the HDL fraction, which is very important. And another thing we're looking at is this concept of metabolic syndrome. Now, what's that? Well, look, metabolic syndrome is a situation like this. In a woman, if she develops a waist size of about 35 inches, or a man around 40 inches, and the blood pressure tends to go up, the triglycerides are up, the HDL is down, so they have a poor, triglyceride to HDL ratio, and their blood sugar seems to creep up, that's metabolic syndrome, and that's really inflammatory. So the best of the old science is looking at metabolic syndrome and looking at that triglyceride to HDL ratio. But now we have the new science. The new science is taking your cholesterol and now dissecting it. We call it cholesterol fractionization. And what are we looking at here? Well, first of all, we're looking at your HDL components. We call it HDL2 and HDL3, but I'll tell you this, HDL2 is fluffier, more buoyant than HDL3. It's more protective. The same thing is true of LDL. We can't say all LDL is bad, but some LDLs are inflammatory. We can take a very small particle size. It's called a BB shot LDL. It's small, it's dense, it's inflammatory, it makes the blood a little bit thicken, and we call it small BB shot LDL. There's another form of LDL we call LP little a. Maybe your doctor's ordered it for you. I hope he or she has. It's good science. The LP little a is a very small cholesterol particle. It has what we call a disulfide bridge. It's highly inflammatory. It makes the blood clot or thicken, and it causes inflammation inside the blood vessel. We don't want to have a high LP little a. We don't want to have a high small particle LDL. So folks, the new science is really important. When you go to your doctor, and if he and she orders a cholesterol test, tell her you want a VAP test, or an LPP, or an NMR. These are the tests you can get by the modern laboratories. Because look, if you're going to change your diet for a lifetime, or if you're going to take a statin drug, you really need to dissect your cholesterol and know exactly what you're treating. If you're treating your cholesterol, or your doctor is giving you a drug based on total cholesterol or the amount of HDL or LDL, that's not good science. I don't call that smart medicine. There are far better ways of looking at this total cholesterol concept and myth. You need to dissect it, fractionate it, and bring new science to the table. Well, folks, with all this emphasis on cholesterol, now we created a new problem. Basically, drugs to counteract cholesterol. And this is the statin story. And there's an enormous amount of confusion about this. But look, I'm a board-certified cardiologist. I use statins in my practice. Statins can have a blessing and they can have a curse. Let me talk about the light side of statins first. First of all, statin drugs can do a lot of good things. They're actually antioxidants, believe it or not. They reduce inflammation, and they have these remarkable, what we call pleiotropic effects. Not only are these pleiotropic effects anti-inflammatory, but they can change the shape of red blood cells as they're going through the spleen. We call that blood rheology. And they can make the blood less viscous. That means it can make your blood thinner. And what we really want, thin blood. It's thick blood that is not good for the heart. So, statins have another effect, and it's this. In high-risk men, especially smoking men, it showed protection in one clinical study. A lot of these men had low HDL. This is a serious risk factor in men because we know that in men with low HDL, their blood tends to thicken. And we know statins thin the blood. So in a male with a previous history of a heart attack, a stent, a bypass, an angioplasty, and especially if that male has a low HDL, I would be the first to use a statin. Even though I'm an integrative cardiologist, that would be my first choice. So middle-aged men between the ages of 40 and 70 with a previous history of those cardiac problems, sure, I would choose a low-dose statin, and I would chase it down with at least a couple hundred milligrams of coenzyme Q10, because remember, statins deplete coenzyme Q10. What about other segments of the population? Would I use statins in women? For the most part, no. I've seen very little utility in women, so for most women, I don't choose a statin. Do I use statins in children? Well, maybe 1 in a million, folks. So statins can have a light side, particularly in middle-aged men with a previous coronary problem, but statins have a dark side. I call it the curse. First of all, the benefits are widely exaggerated, and it's not necessary to reduce cholesterol numbers. We need to treat patients, not just cholesterol numbers. You know, one of the most common consults I saw in my office was a woman in her 30s. She comes in because she has a high cholesterol and a doctor treats her with a statin. And guess what? She's having side effects. And she comes in and she says, do I have to take this because my cholesterol numbers are so-and-so? And I look at her and I say, absolutely not. Then she bursts into tears and she hugs me. Statins have a horrific dark side. They cause an enormous amount of symptoms. And let me just give you a few. Weakness, muscle pain, we call it myalgia, stiffness, fatigue. I've had patients tell me, doctor, I'm getting older. I can't get out of a chair. I can't play doubles tennis like I could, even 6 months ago. I say, are you taking a statin? They go, yes. I would say, look, you're not getting older. It's the side effects of statins. Statins cause cognitive problems. They cause erectile dysfunction in men. I've seen it in my office. The side effects are so grossly underreported that there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who think they're ill and have some sort of problem, and yet it's statin toxicity. Why do we get statin toxicity? First of all, statins deplete vital nutrients, especially coenzyme Q10. Statins also are mitochondrial toxins. In other words, they can directly be toxic to the mitochondria in a spirit of depleting coenzyme Q10 at the same time. So in a way, statins can accelerate aging. That's why I do not like to use them in men over the age of 70. There is data to show they can get cognitive impairment. So in the older folks, I don't like to use statins regardless of their heart health. And look, again, I don't treat high cholesterol numbers. But if I had a middle-aged male with a low cholesterol, I'm still going to give him a statin if he had all those cardiac concerns I said previously. What's the takeaway? Look, statins can have a bright side and a dark side. The bright side first, they can thin the blood, they act as antioxidants, they're anti-inflammatories. I love them in middle-aged men with coronary disease, and they do good things. They have a bad side. They come with a lot of excess baggage, horrific side effects, musculoskeletal problems, cognitive problems, GI. The list goes on and on. Should you take a statin if you have high cholesterol? and you're healthy, I wouldn't. If you're a male with coronary disease, I would give you a statin regardless of your cholesterol because of its pleiotropic effects. So in a final analysis, if you go to your doctor and he or she wants to put you on a statin, you ask, why? I want to talk to you now about the cholesterol drug trials. You know, your doctor may be prescribing a statin drug based on cholesterol-lowering trials that he or she read in the 90s and all the way up to even today. But something happened in 2005 that I want to discuss with you. First of all, the trials prior to 2005 were mostly positive, occasional negative, but mostly positive, showing a strong correlation between cholesterol lowering and improved heart health. 2005, when these anti-inflammatory drugs came out in the market and they were causing heart health and brain health problems, the FDA put the pharmaceutical companies under a microscope. They wanted more safety. They were scrutinized. The research was scrutinized. What happened after 2005? Well, after the scrutiny by the FDA, the trials after 2005, and even to this day, are not as strong or positive as the relationship between cholesterol lowering and cardiovascular events. There's a disconnect here. Now, Michel de Largedille, the French cardiologist who is the author of the Mediterranean Diet, wrote an article about this. He's asking for a full reappraisal of the cholesterol theory in heart disease. Michel de Largedille, like myself and others, do not believe that cholesterol is the major cardinal cardiovascular risk factor. We need a reappraisal of all the trials. In the next segment, I'm going to discuss the Mediterranean diet. Let's start first with heart health and nutrition. I like a non-inflammatory diet. Now, what is that? Well, my solution is the Pan-Asian Mediterranean diet. Remember, Michel de Largedille talked about the Mediterranean diet. He was one of the authors. And this diet is kind of interesting. It's a lot of fruits and vegetables with polyphenols and carotenoids. You know, it has great low glycemic veggies in it, like broccoli and chickpeas, and there's avocado and nuts, and there's some fish. And, you know, the Mediterranean peoples, they don't eat chunks of meat like so many like Americans do, but they flavor their sauces with meats. They also drink a little red wine, and they use olive oil. So basically, the Mediterranean diet really works. And what it showed, despite the fact that it's much higher in fat than what the American Heart Association recommends, it's a diet that results in less cardiovascular events. It was recently portrayed again in the New England Journal of Medicine only a couple of months ago. Now, I also like the Pan-Asian diet. You know, the island of Okinawa, south of Japan, has one of the highest longevity rates in the world. And, well, what do they eat? Well, a lot of wild fish, a lot of wild seaweed. Seaweed is what is considered to be one of my 12 top healing foods. Why? First of all, it contains all 56 vitamins and minerals. You're going to get a lot with seaweed, plus it contains alginates, which helps to detox the body. So the combination of the Mediterranean diet and the Pan-Asian diet, I feel, is the best diet. If you want to chase that diet down with a little bit of red wine, you know, a glass a day or a glass every other day or 2 glasses every other day, that's okay. Even in the last study in the New England Journal, those participants were drinking a glass a day, and again, they had an improvement in heart health. My next pillar of heart health is really exercise. Folks, it's never too late to exercise. If you're in your mid-80s and you want to start walking, God bless you. Listen, the older we get more muscle wasting. We call it sarcopenia. And in order to prevent muscle wasting, you must do some forms of weight-bearing exercise. You'll also help to prevent what we call weakening of the bones, you know? You need strong bones. You need stronger muscles. And exercise is great at any level for any age group. And look, you don't have to pump iron or run marathons. What I like is walking the dog. I like dancing, ballroom dancing, any form of dancing. I like yoga and Pilates. Remember, when you do yoga and Pilates, you're into stretching and range of motion. It's good for you. It also helps to alleviate stress. Because remember, when we do yoga and we breathe in to the tension or to the twist, we're stimulating heart rate variability, which calms the autonomic nervous system. Exercise has a lot of benefits. In addition to stress and tension reduction, it helps to keep blood sugar levels lower, triglyceride levels lower, and we also tend to lose a little weight. So for me, a daily exercise routine is great. And again, you don't have to do much, but I want you to stick to it. My next pillar of healing is heart health and supplements. Why? Because we live in a toxic environment. It's not just the chemicals and the insecticides and the pesticides and the heavy metals and the mercury and the EMF and the RF. We live in an environment that's so toxic. We're getting so much oxidative stress and so many free radicals in our body that we need additional support. And if you eat, a healthy diet with lots of fruits and vegetables and they're organic, that's a great place to start, but we have to complement it. And what I like is a basic foundation program, specifically a gender-specific multivitamin mineral program. There's good stuff for men and there's good stuff for women. I like less vitamin E for women. I like more magnesium for women. I like prostate support for men. I like hair, nails, and skin support for women. So I make gender-specific supplements. I also like omega-3s. We should all be taking at least 1 gram to 2 grams of omega-3 a day. And I like calamine oil. Why? Because it contains higher DHA over EPA. Remember, for a cardiologist like myself, the DHA gets into the retina of the eye, the brain, and the heart. And actually, it's music to my ears because it calms those tissues. In addition to the multivitamin mineral, gender-specific, and omega-3, I love the awesome foursome. And that includes L-carnitine, magnesium, D-ribose, and coenzyme Q10. That's my answer, folks. That's my Sinatra solution for targeted nutritional support. Now I'd like to talk about heart health and mind-body interactions. Folks, I studied 10 years of psychotherapy. In fact, I got a certification in bioenergetic psychotherapy because I realized that in order to be a good cardiologist, I needed to study the heart from the neck up. Yes, it's true. There's a hot, I'll say it again, a hot brain heart line. What goes on in the brain can affect the heart and vice versa. And stress can hurt you. There's no doubt about it. Now look, we all have stress in our life. We can't live a life without stress. But it's not the stress that hurts you, but it's how you cope. It's how you react to that stressful stimuli. I remember one of my mentors, Dr. Robert Elliott, who wrote the book, It's Not Worth Dying For. He said, look, first of all, there's nothing worth dying for, and I agree. And the other thing he says, don't sweat the small stuff because it's all small stuff anyway. He would recommend going with the least form of resistance. I agree with that. I agree with the fact that if you're dealing with a situation that you have no control over, we'll go with the flow. Again, live in your awareness. Trust your feelings. If you're coping with a situation and you don't know what to do, but you feel angry or sad, well, experience the feeling. Sadness is important to experience because I believe suppressed sadness could cause cardiovascular events later in life. That's why I wrote the book, Heartbreak and Heart Disease. You must respect your feelings because your feelings are the truth. Remember, whatever goes down in this part of the body, tell us the truth. Above the neck lies a lot. So, if you're sad, again, don't ask why I'm sad. Just be sad. And cry if you want to. Crying is the best way to alleviate the heartbreak that could lead to heart problems later on. My favorite stress reduction techniques include breathing, Because when you breathe into pain, psychic pain, emotional pain, you're breathing, you're taking a full breath, and again, you're supporting the parasympathetic limb of the autonomic nervous system. I like laughter. Laughter is great. And if you laugh deeply enough, you could cry. And to me, like I said before, crying is one of the best ways of alleviating stress because it helps soften the body. My fifth heart health pillar of healing is detoxification. You know, a lot of conventional doctors really don't understand detoxification. I didn't either until 15 years ago. I gave a lecture and one of the keynote speakers was a naturopath talking about detoxification. It was an incredible aha for me. I learned so much from that naturopath and I put it into my pillars of healing. Look, folks, we come in contact with thousands of chemicals, insecticides and pesticides and heavy metals. And there's also toxins we can't see, like radio frequency and electromagnetic forces. We can't see, feel, taste, or touch radiation. You know, one of the most toxic things you have in your own home is a cordless phone. It's like having a cell phone tower in your house going off 24/7. When you use your cell phone, use a speakerphone. Don't hold it. You're getting those vibrations into your body. And look, I'm not against using the internet. We all need to have these, things at our fingertips. We all want, convenience, but don't sacrifice safety for convenience. For example, use the Ethernet. Don't use Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi can cause enormous disturbances to younger children. 99% of us live in the dark about these toxic forces in our environment. We must protect our children, and especially the unborn and even the newborn. This is so important. I can't overemphasize it. In addition to being aware of the EMF, I want you to consider juicing or doing fraps or shakes with fruits and vegetables, preferably organic, because you need those live enzymes, and they'll help detoxify the body. I like sweating, like hot yoga. I love this far-infrared sauna. When you use a sauna, what happens is you'll sweat out, and stuff from the subcutaneous pores of the fat layer underneath your skin. And what comes out are chemicals, insecticides, and pesticides, and even mercury. So my Sinatra solution for detoxification is widespread. Awareness is curative. Be aware about the EMF forces. Do healthy fruits and vegetables. Do some juicing and sweat it out. My sixth pillar of heart health is earthing or grounding. Now, what is earthing? Well, basically, earthing is putting your bare feet on the ground or walking with leather shoes on, concrete, grass, brick, even a beach for that matter. Although I'd rather see you walk barefoot. Or it's sleeping with an earthing pad or an earthing sheet. What does earthing do? Whenever you put your feet in contact with Mother Earth, you're soaking in electrons. Remember this, the Earth is struck by lightning thousands of times, particularly around the equator. And the Earth is rich in electrons. When we walk on the Earth, or when we sleep grounded, we get these electrons into the body. And these electrons act like antioxidants, and they neutralize free radical positive charge in the body. When we sleep grounded or walk grounded, we're also getting stress reduction. We're attenuating the autonomic nervous system, and we're stimulating the parasympathetic limb, and we're improving heart rate variability. There's lots of heart research to show that grounding is good for the heart, including thinning the blood. I wrote the paper myself. I did the research myself. So I love earthing and grounding. It's something that we have to put into our daily day. Try to ground every day for at least a half hour, or at least sleep grounded. What are my key takeaways for supporting heart health? Well, to summarize, the Pan-Asian modified Mediterranean diet, exercise at least 30 minutes a day, taking a multivitamin mineral combination, a gram or two of omega-3, and my awesome foursome, coenzyme Q10, carnitine, magnesium, and D-ribose. Cleanse your body, detoxify, ground, assimilate those electrons, and be aware of mind-body interactions. Remember, it's not the stress, it's how you react to it. So folks, to summarize this webinar, I hope I've convinced you that cholesterol is not the major risk factor in heart disease. The real culprits, the real villains, trans fats and sugars. We talked about the pros and cons of statins, and we also talked about who and who should not take statins. We also talked about my 6 pillars of healing and how to follow my heart health protection program. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope I've dispelled the myth that cholesterol is the villain and provided you with the guidance you need to make informed decisions about your heart health.
Thank you, Dr. Sinatra. We really appreciate your insights, guidance, and tips on this critically important and little understood topic today. We're going to start the portion of the question and answer session. To start off the question and answer session, Dr. Sinatra, the first question I have for you is this. Does a family history of heart disease mean you don't have to worry about your cholesterol? There are a number of questions coming in from the audience on family history.
I'm glad family history was brought up. This is very important. Look, if you have a family history of a member who had a sudden cardiac death or a heart attack in their early life, 40s, 50s, or 60s, you need to be very proactive about checking your risk factors. And look, a lot of doctors would check blood sugar, cholesterol, triglycerides. It's a place to start. But you need to check other factors as well. Your C-reactive protein, your serum ferritin, which is a measure of iron overload in the body, which can be genetically inherited. The homocysteine, which can also be genetically inherited. And remember, higher homocysteine levels can cause more free radical oxidative stress and accelerated aging of blood vessels. You need to know your fibrinogen. Your fibrinogen is important because it causes increased clotting in blood. And most importantly, in addition to C-reactive protein, you need to know your Lp(a). Lp(a) can be inherited, and when it is, it's a dangerous risk factor because of the nature of what it does to the bloodstream. It causes inflammation and blood clotting. So if you have a family history, it's a little bit more complex than just cholesterol. I would certainly get your cholesterol fractionated, and I would certainly get all the components of metabolic syndrome, but you must get the C-reactive protein, the fibrinogen, the homocysteine, the ferritin, and the Lp(a) as well.
I appreciate you providing that level of detail because that's a question that we often also get on your Facebook and Twitter and on your blog. So hopefully we have provided an answer for many people on that question today. Here's one that just came in. I'm a 56-year-old male and I recently had a heart attack. I'm following a vegetarian diet. Am I doing the right thing?
Well, Donna, that's a great question. And for you folks out there who are on a pure vegetarian diet and have had a cardiac event, I'm with you. That's a good decision. Why? Because look, a plant-based diet is perfectly okay, especially if you've had a cardiac event, because if you do a pure plant-based diet, you're going to be getting lots of fiber and a lot of complex carbohydrates. And if you're getting 40, 50, 60 grams of fiber a day, your lipid levels are going to go down in the basement because you're going to just cleanse it right out of your body. The other thing about the vegetarian diet that's vitally important is this. The downside is that you must complement your diet with targeted nutritional supports. Why? Because in a vegan diet or a pure vegetarian diet, a pure plant-based diet, however you call it, you're not going to get the B vitamin support, the alpha-lipoic acid support, the Q10 and the carnitine support, because those vital nutrients come from the animal kingdom. I've always liked the 80-20 rule. I like an 80% plant-based diet, and I like 20% animal protein, preferably coming from wild fish, and just like what the Asians and Mediterraneans do. So my Sinatra solution is more about balance. I like the best of both worlds.
The American Heart Association recommends that your total cholesterol level be less than 200 because anything higher could risk your heart health. Should I pay attention to that advice?
Well, whether you pay attention or not, it doesn't concern me because, again, there are multiple cultures out there with cholesterols way over 200 that have a very low incidence of cardiac problems. So In this country, if the American Heart Association wants your cholesterol to be less than 200, well, that's their belief. My belief, and the belief of other cardiologists, is this. Cholesterol is not the major risk factor in heart disease. If your triglycerides are over 200, hey, that's a different kettle of fish. If your blood sugars are higher, that's different as well. I don't mind cholesterols of over 200. I do mind when the triglycerides and the blood sugars or the hemoglobin A1C, which is a steady state high blood sugar, when they're out of whack, I get much more concerned than a cholesterol of over 200.
We've received a number of questions about your heart health program. This question is, can I really lower my heart health risk without taking medication?
Absolutely. I mean, look, what's one of the greatest heart health risks? Well, I have to tell you, it's overweight status. Look, a mere 10 or 20 pounds can make an enormous impact on your health. Why is that? Well, in the old days, we used to think if you were heavy or heavier, that your blood sugar would be higher, your blood pressure could be higher, your triglycerides could be higher, and that's all good stuff. But here's the real stuff. This is the secret sauce I'm going to give you. Did you know that inflammatory cytokines, these little chemical messengers like C-reactive protein and the interleukins, they live in fat cells? So if you have a lot of fat around your tummy, like a lot of people have with metabolic syndrome, what you want to do is take away the home. The way you take away the home is reduce the visceral body fat. So a mere 5, 10, or 20 pounds can make an enormous impact on your health because you're taking away the inflammatory mediators that can impact your heart health.
On the question of weight, I am 50 pounds overweight, and it seems I can do everything but lose weight. I exercise 30 minutes 3 days a week, and overall, I eat healthfully with plenty of fruits and vegetables. Do I still have to worry about my heart, Dr. Sinatra?
Well, again, I think weight reduction is one of the best things you can do for your heart. It's not only about the stress that it can put on your blood pressure and your lipids, but it's also about the inflammatory cytokines that I answered in the previous question. I would say this. If you're struggling with weight loss and you've done everything right, check with your doctor. Make sure you don't have an adrenal problem or specifically a thyroid problem. Those are two important characteristics. The other thing is, in addition to your exercise program, and hopefully you're eating the right amount of calories and you're avoiding sugars, and I'll take that at face value, but are you doing other things? Are you taking omega-3 essential fatty acids? Are you taking green tea, for example? Are you drinking green tea? If you drink coffee, for example, or regular teas, you might increase cortisol, which will keep your weight on. If you're drinking green tea, you might be taking a thermogenic, for example, that increases what we call the heat production in your body, where you can lose more weight. The other thing about exercise is this. Once you exercise and you're building muscle mass, then what you're doing is you are building what we call the thermodynamics of the body. You're building lean muscle mass. And when you have more lean muscle mass and less fat, then you're burning more calories at rest. So I'm giving you a couple of tips. I hope you follow through, and maybe you can let me know how you did when we do our next webinar.
Those tips are very, very helpful, Dr. Sinatra. Here's a question. Is there a relationship between menopause and cholesterol? And as a woman in menopause, do I need to do anything special for my heart health?
Great question. You know, one of the reasons why I wrote the book Heart Sense for Women back in the year 2000 was because women are getting heart disease now more often than men. Now, why is that? Well, look, if you have to be like a woman, act like a man, and work like a dog, that's a bad scenario. And the problem is when a woman crosses over the menopause, she goes over that 45, 50 area, her incidence of cardiac problems goes up 400%. So when you ask about a postmenopausal woman, if she has to be concerned, yes. The problem is that most women worry about breast cancer. I think it's a good worry. I mean, 1 in 6 women get breast cancer, but 1 in 2 women die of heart disease. So for me, I want you to be informed about heart disease as well.
Let's talk a little bit about natural herbs. We've gotten quite a few questions about this as well. Apparently, there are a number of people out there who are trying to find ways to lower their cholesterol naturally. And the question here is, how do you feel about the use of red yeast rice to manage cholesterol?
Well, red yeast rice is sort of a statin in disguise. It's very powerful. It's what we call an HMG co-reductase inhibitor, just like statin drugs. So if you're going to take this herbal preparation, I would certainly take it with coenzyme Q10, at least 100 milligrams twice a day. And remember, I've seen patients who had side effects on red yeast rice, just like statins. So it's more natural, but it acts like a statin. You got to treat it like a statin.
And here's another question that's come in about the use of natural herbs. How do you feel about natural herbs such as ginkgo to help manage healthy cholesterol levels?
You know, I'm not a big fan of ginkgo. I mean, the problem with ginkgo is that, people take it for all sorts of reasons. A lot of people take it for memory and for cognition and helping one's cognition. But ginkgo to me, especially if people take it with aspirin, can get an additive effect, and it could cause excessive bleeding. I've seen it cause bleeding in the eye, and I've seen it cause bleeding into the brain. So I'd rather not use any ginkgo at all, especially in patients with cardiovascular problems.
Dr. Sinatra, you mentioned during the course of this webinar that you'd received a fair amount of support on the cholesterol myth in your new book, The Cholesterol Myth, that doctors are starting to recognize that there's a new way of thinking about cholesterol, and it's not the number, it's the patient. Question is, do you think most doctors are well past relying simply on your total cholesterol number to measure how healthy your heart is?
That's a problem. Today, doctors are still looking at total cholesterol, HDL and LDL, and they're making decisions based on those cholesterol fragments. To me, that's not smart medicine. If you're going to be placed on a drug, especially a drug that can come with a lot of excess baggage, and again, it can help certain populations, particularly middle-aged men, like I talked about, you must know what you're treating. You got to bring more science to the table. So I feel like getting a total cholesterol, an HDL, and an LDL, and making an informed decision on that is a dinosaur. I would rather see your doctor go to the higher level and get a cholesterol fractionization test.
We have a number of questions here related to food, and of course you get a lot of these questions on your Facebook page every single day. A lot of interest in what to eat, what not to eat, nutrition for heart health, etc. Here's one. I sometimes eat a high-fat meal. Should I be concerned what impact that could have on my heart health?
You sometimes eat a high-fat meal? No, that's fine. I mean, look, I don't vilify saturated fats. But look, folks, if you start having bacon and cheese and hamburgers every day and basically, flooding your system with saturated fats, you're out of balance. That's not good. Saturated fats are okay, but again, the question here is occasional. That's fine. Am I going to vilify coconut oil? Absolutely not. I cook in coconut oil. Am I going to vilify something like avocados that contain a lot of monounsaturated fats? Absolutely not, because I feel like they're really good for you. They have advantages. When it comes to putting a lot of fat in a diet, just remember this, it's about balance. You do not want to flood your body with excessive monounsaturated or saturated fats on a daily basis. But using it with discernment is perfectly okay.
For a long time, eggs were perceived as the villain. Are they on the menu or off the menu?
Well, I eat eggs. I eat, DHA fortified, range-free eggs. In fact, I would say I have at least 4 to 6 eggs per week. So I'm not going to vilify eggs. Eggs contain magnesium and sulfur and protein. The egg white is full of protein. But there was an article, and I should mention it, and it's this. If you're eating a lot of conventional eggs, particularly men, and you're eating more than 6 a week, and they're not the range-free eggs, these men had a higher incidence of prostate problems. So when it comes to eggs, and you want to do more than 6 a week, or 4 to 6 a week, then I would say go with the best eggs, the range-free, the cage-free, the DHA fortified.
Dr. Sinatra, let's try to shed a little bit more light on margarine and butter. Still seems to be a bit of confusion around that. Margarine's a bad thing, not a bad thing. Butter's a bad thing, not a bad thing. Should you eat either one?
Well, what I prefer is organic butter. And the only thing I'm concerned about butter is this. When you open up butter in your refrigerator, sometimes there's a yellow color over the butter, and if you scrape it off, then it becomes clearer. So if you have butter in your refrigerator, and remember it's a saturated fat, and it's the least prone to oxidation, because it's been in there a while, it can oxidize, so I scrape that off. But healthy organic butter, I like it. Now, what about margarine? Well, there's margarines today that allegedly are free of trans fats, but if that container says that it contains partially hydrogenated, oils, and it lists them, corn oil, canola, safflower, cottonseed oil. If any of those oils are within that margarine, I wouldn't take it. And again, if I had to make the choice, I would take organic butter over margarine.
We seem to have a number of participants out there with a sweet tooth. You say everything in moderation. So, does that mean that I have to avoid sugar at all costs? Can I no longer have that apple crisp at dinner tonight?
Good question. Look, we don't want to take away your pleasure. I don't want to take away your pleasure. I'll tell you what I do. I love dark chocolate, organic, cocoa-based chocolate, 60, 70%, even 76% cocoa. It satisfies my sweet tooth, and I'm helping my heart at the same time. There's great research to show that the polyphenols in cocoa and dark chocolate can actually protect your heart. So, would I eat chocolate at every meal? Absolutely not. But would I have a little square of dark chocolate maybe every other day? Sure, and that's what I do. I rely on dark chocolate as my comfort food after a meal.
I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to hear that. Now we have a couple of questions here related to statins. This one just came in. Is statin-induced high blood sugar reversible?
Oh, great question. When the Jupiter study came out and the Women's Health Initiative, it showed that postmenopausal women were getting blood sugar elevations up to as much as 48%. That's significant. And premenopausal women had these blood sugar elevations of 13%. Now, this is certainly a downside of statins. You do not want to get higher blood sugar in your bloodstream because remember, in the webinar, when I talked about glycation, if you got proteins in your blood with higher blood sugar, it's going to age you. So it's my feeling like this. If you don't have to use a statin, don't use it. If you go off the statin, the good news is that these blood sugar elevations will come down.
Why exactly do these cholesterol-lowering drugs cause memory issues and these other things you were referring to earlier in the webinar? Stiffness, pain, numbness, etc.
The insanity about treating total cholesterol and getting LDL down to less than 60, I think it's Frankenstein medicine. I get a little upset with that. And the reason being is that you need cholesterol. Look, the gray matter of the brain is like 60 to 70% fat. And you need cholesterol in your brain. Cholesterol forms the neuron sheaths, and it's also vital for what we call neurotransmitter delivery. It creates signals between the neurons. They talk to one another. Without cholesterol, cognition goes down in the basement. So when I see doctors trying to get LDLs down to 60 and 70, I really worry about cognition problems.
Dr. Sinatra, I think you'll be particularly pleased about this question. Obviously, your message has resonated with many, many people today. Where do I find a doctor like you?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. I teach doctors all the time. I go to conferences and I interact with doctors. They teach me, I teach them. But I do have a top docs list, and I know personally about 80% of those doctors. And a lot of these doctors follow the same philosophy I do. You know, they recommend a non-inflammatory diet and exercise. They use targeted nutraceuticals. They all believe in coenzyme Q10. They believe in detoxification, and they believe in mind-body medicine, and most of them even believe in grounding. So, you know, I would say my top docs list on drsinatra.com is probably the best place to go.
Well, that's all the time we have for questions today, so I think we'll end on that note. I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Sinatra, for helping us understand the important role that cholesterol plays in our bodies, shedding light on the real culprits when it comes to our heart health, and showing us how we can improve our heart health, well-being, and longevity.
Donna, it was a great day. I had some fun. I hope I made a difference in somebody's life, and I'd love to do this again in the future.
For those of you who may still have questions for Dr. Sinatra, you can find Dr. Sinatra on Facebook, Twitter, and on his blog at drsinatra.com. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we will send out an additional email with today's presentation and materials, along with Dr. Sinatra's recommended key heart health tests. Thank you, everyone.